Hi there. Thanks for joining me here on Conversations for Yoga Teachers. I'm your host, Karen Fabian, the founder of Bare Bones Yoga and the creator of the Momentum Magic Method, the way to become a confident teacher, one who effortlessly walks around the room, shares clear cues, easily builds sequences, and speaks from your heart, sharing authentically with your students. Here on the podcast, you'll discover new and inspiring ways to share your cues and create your sequences. You'll uncover habits and frameworks all designed to empower you so that you can teach in a way that feels authentic and natural. For some episodes, I'll have a guest, and other episodes I'll share with you on my own, and in each one, you'll always get action steps and takeaways you can apply right away to your teaching. In addition to the podcast, follow me on Instagram and TikTok for daily videos. You'll see a link on both of my profiles, my Stan Store link. Click it and unlock ways you can get the support you need to be the teacher of your dreams. You'll find links to the podcast, my free ebook, and other resources to help you be the best teacher you can be. You'll also find the link to my signature program, the Yoga Anatomy Blueprint Learning Program, and you can see if you qualify to enroll. So with that, let's get on with today's show. Hi there. Welcome to Conversations for Yoga Teachers. I'm your host, Karen Fabian, and this is episode 370. I'm recording this on September 25th, 2025, so 9/25/25, which is kind of cool from a numerology standpoint. And this is going to go live on my birthday, Monday, September 29th, 2025. I will be 61 years old. And I say it loud and I say it proud. Never understand why people don't share what their age is, regardless of what their age is. I will never not share my age because I am just super grateful to be alive and grateful to be healthy and just grateful for my family and my friends and just that I get to walk another year on this earth, God willing. So yeah, when you are listening to this, it will either be on my birthday or shortly thereafter. Now, for today's episode, we're going to talk a little bit about working full time and teaching on the side. And I was inspired to talk about this topic because last night I had the final session of book club. And I don't know if you heard, maybe you saw my Instagram stories or you're on my email list and you got the alerts about this. Maybe you were there. Maybe you heard about it on a prior episode. In any event, I held my first virtual book club, and there were two sessions, and we covered the book Big Magic by bestselling author Elizabeth Gilbert. And if you don't know Elizabeth Gilbert's name, you might be familiar with one of her prior books called Eat, Pray, Love, which of course was just an international bestseller. It sold millions and millions of copies. It inspired a movie with Julia Roberts and Xavier Bardem. And it was just an amazing book. And it was a true story, her personal journey. And several years later, she wrote Big Magic. And I read that book when it came out, which was, I think, 10 years ago. And I immediately connected with so many of the themes. And even though the book is about creativity, it's not about teaching yoga. Teaching yoga is a creative endeavor. And when I read the book, I just connected to so many of the themes in it from the perspective of someone who teaches yoga. And so I knew this was the book I wanted to use for my first book club. And to be honest, I'm not even quite sure. Maybe it's because she has a new book coming out now that I was reminded of. That's what it was. She has a new book coming out now. I was reminded about a month ago of Big Magic. I'd read it multiple times. I picked it up again. And as soon as I started reading it again, I was inspired to share it through this book club format. So we had two sessions, and honestly, it wasn't something I'd ever done before. And I was really nervous. And I want to share that with you because I know when you come on here and you listen to the show, you probably get the sense that I'm really, really confident when it comes to teaching yoga, to teaching anatomy, to coaching yoga teachers in my programs. And that's absolutely true. I feel like I'm definitely in my zone of genius when I do those things. But when I started to plan for this book club, I was really nervous because it wasn't a format I had ever created before. And honestly, the thing that scared me the most was in order to do the book justice, I was going to need to actually read some passages from the book because we weren't sitting all together in a room. I didn't know if anybody else had read it. And honestly, I was thinking, I've never even been to a book club. How do they even do it? My assumption was that when you join a book club, everybody reads the book, or they are reading the book in the process of coming to the book club sessions. But I didn't want to put that kind of time burden on the people coming to my book club. So I said to them, you don't even need to read it. But what that left me with was the responsibility of being sort of the megaphone, the communicator of the lessons in the book. And the thing that I hate the most about Zoom sessions is when you attend a Zoom session of whatever topic and the person running the session is just talking nonstop, because I think that that is so boring for the viewers. So when I was starting to create the agenda for the first of the two sessions, I was getting nervous thinking, I'm going to be talking a lot. And that in my mind is not good. So what I ended up doing was I created a number of inquiry questions that I peppered throughout session one and session two. And this allowed me to take several pauses throughout the session and ask the audience a question and wait for their response in the chat, read the responses. So it created a little bit of a back and forth without the potential challenge of allowing everybody to open up their microphones whenever they wanted. I was a little concerned if we did that along the way, we could potentially get off track and it could really extend the length of the session. So at the end of each session, I left time at the end for people to open up their microphones and dialogue. And at the end of both sessions, well, actually, at the end of the first session, there was a little bit of that. At the end of the second session, not so much, but there was pretty active chat going on in both. So the bottom line is, I'm really, really pleased with how it came out. I would definitely do it again. It was a lot of work on my part, and I didn't charge for this. This was a free experience. But now that I've done it, I can repurpose it. I have a better idea of how to do it, and I would definitely do it again. I'm a pretty avid reader, so I'm most likely going to come up with another book that I've either read before or I will read, that would be a good topic for the book club. So I'll just throw it out to you. If you have a book that you've read that you would like to submit to be considered for future book club sessions, definitely send me a DM on Instagram and let me know. But the most important thing, and the reason I'm sharing this with you, is not just to share with you the idea of this book club that I did, but also to share with you this idea of putting yourself in positions on a regular basis where you're doing something new. And because my guess is that you're a yoga teacher, that might be something as small as changing a little bit about your sequence, or telling a story in your class, or ending class with something before Shavasana that's new, or asking the studio where you teach if you can teach a workshop and taking on the responsibility of planning, implementing, running a workshop. Looking for things as a yoga teacher that allow you to be out there on your edge, feeling uncomfortable and working through that discomfort. Because at the end of it, just like me, you're going to be so proud of yourself and you're going to be really, really glad that you did. Now, am I feeling like it went perfect? Of course not. Do I even know what perfect looks like? No. But I can definitely say that I wasn't really going for perfection. I was really going for connection. I wanted to feel connection with the attendees, and I definitely felt that. I wanted to get some feedback from them along the way. In other words, not feedback, but I wanted to get the sense that they were participating. And via the chat and the conversation, I definitely feel like they did. And I wanted to have a sense that people felt like it was valuable. And I got some feedback that they did. So those were the outcomes that I was looking for. And so I just encourage you to really push yourself to do something new, to do something different, to take on a new challenge. There's still 3 full months left in the year of 2025 if you're listening kind of in sync with when I'm releasing this episode. So you have plenty of time before this year is out to take on something new and to really put yourself out there. So, with that, one of the conversations that we had in the book club was about a particular chapter in Big Magic, where Elizabeth Gilbert talks about when she released the book Eat, Pray, Love, and when it really started to take off. She writes about how prior to that, she was the kind of writer who always had a day job. And she sort of frowned upon herself for doing that because she had this vision in her mind that the most accomplished authors are the ones that never have to bother with a full-time job and they can just completely ensconce themselves in writing. And that was something she sort of aspired to do, but she kept her day job. And we're going to talk a little bit about literally what she wrote in the book towards the end of this. But I wanted to bring this topic to you, especially if you're working a full-time job and you're teaching your classes on the side and you're feeling like, oh, this isn't good enough. And maybe you're feeling a little jealous of people who you hear are working as full-time yoga teachers. I wanted to have a conversation with you so that hopefully by the end of this, you've made a sense of peace with what you're doing and maybe we can shift the mindset from, oh, this isn't good enough to, you know what, this is perfect for me right now. And it doesn't detract from the impact that I'm making. So let's first talk a little bit about what are the myths associated with teaching yoga full time. And I'll start out by saying I can remember in 2002, 2002, I believe it was, I went to my first teacher training. And I remember on the way home, I was flying with a bunch of women from the training, and we had a layover in New York City, I believe. And I remember as we were all sitting on the floor in the terminal waiting for our next flight to Boston, I was looking at one of the teachers who was co-leading the training we had just attended for a week in Maya Tulum, Mexico. I was looking at her, just sort of, we were all sitting on the floor, eating snacks or reading magazines, and she had her sort of day timer schedule book opened up. And I remember she was sort of like writing furiously in it, and I was watching her, and I had just spent the week with her and with my teacher at the time, Baron Baptiste, and we had kind of emerged from this really intense week-long training, and I was sort of like with stars in my eyes, mesmerized about the idea of teaching yoga full time. And I, at that point, was working a six-figure corporate job. I was a C-level executive. I mean, I wasn't in a position where I was thinking, oh, I'm having a lot of challenges finding work, and maybe teaching yoga will just be something that can, be something I do to make some money. I was very fortunate and I had worked really hard to get to the point I was in my career. And it wasn't like I was loving what I was doing, but I definitely had, and this was again back in 2002 when the economy was really different. But the point is, I wasn't in struggle. But yet I had just come off of this week-long training and I was really fired up about teaching yoga full time. And I was thinking in my head, how am I going to extricate myself from my corporate lifestyle, from my corporate salary, from the corporate benefits like healthcare, etc., to go teach yoga full time? But yet at the same moment, as I was thinking all these things, and I had been thinking them for honestly the whole week we were away in Mexico in training, I was looking at Elizabeth and she was sitting on the floor and she had her day timer open, and I was dreaming about having a lifestyle like that. I was dreaming about being the kind of person who's a full-time yoga teacher, who flies to these exotic locations a week at a time to co-lead a training with hundreds of, with 100 people or however big it was. And I was really in this feeling of like idolizing her and idolizing that lifestyle. And so I can definitely say, as I began to create and craft my plan for leaving my corporate job, I really switched into pragmatic, objective thinking mode because very quickly, I mean, it doesn't take much just to run the numbers to realize there's no way I'm going to make enough money teaching yoga to cover my bills. And that doesn't even account for benefits, for any emergency fund, for any fun stuff like vacations or going clothes shopping, none of that. Just the basics of covering my day-to-day and month-to-month expenses. It became really clear really fast when I just did some back of the envelope math that it was impossible for me to make that kind of money teaching yoga full time. So let's start with some of these myths. And I think the biggest myth around teaching yoga full time is that this idea that teaching classes is a way to teach yoga full time. And again, all you have to do is run the numbers. And I just have a calculator here in front of me. So let's say you get $50 a class and you teach 15 classes a week. So 50 times 15 is 750 a week times 4 is $3,000. I would be willing to bet that most people listening to this episode need more than $3,000 a month to cover their expenses. And by expenses, I mean rent or mortgage, car and car insurance, health insurance and healthcare costs like copays when you go to the doctor and medicine, utilities, cable, internet, stuff like that, cell phone, right? So you can see how it's adding up. So I think the number one myth about teaching yoga full time is that the model for that is teaching classes. That is not a way that will work unless you are living with someone, a partner, a husband, a wife, whatever it is, that is covering some of your expenses. In that situation, sure, you could do it. Or if you have access to money in another format, like maybe you have an inheritance, or maybe you have a lot of money in the bank for whatever reason. Maybe you have a 401k or an IRA that you've decided to live off of. Maybe you take out a business loan. Maybe you take out a personal loan. Maybe, and this is a really bad decision, you live off credit cards. I don't even want to offer that because it's not a good decision. So those are those, I don't want to say those are the facts. That's the reality. So what that means in terms of a reframe is, well, if I can't do it by just teaching classes, then how can I do it? Well, this is a large part of what I go into in my first book, and you can get it on my website, you can get it on Amazon. It's called Stretched: Build Your Yoga Business, Grow Your Teaching Techniques. And in it, I talk about a lot of the trips and falls I had in my first couple of years of teaching from a business perspective. And I share a lot of lessons because I don't want people to make the mistakes that I made. And one of the things I realized early on is exactly what I'm sharing with you now, which is that I realized there's no way I'm going to make enough money just teaching classes. Certainly not teaching classes at $50 a class. And $50 a class is, I don't want to say it's the average, but for some people, they're not even getting $50 a class. And that's like a bit of a sidebar conversation. And we don't have time to go into it now. It has to do with your worth. It has to do with your negotiating. It has to do with the kind of opportunities you're pursuing and taking. But $50 a class is low. So what this really suggests is that we want to create a portfolio of services where the per service rate is actually higher than $50. So this, just really briefly, and I go into this a lot more in the book, this gets into things like teaching privates, teaching on your own outside of studios where you set the rate with schools or private workout centers or gyms, or there are lots, I have a whole list in the book. There are lots of different ways that you can market yourself as a yoga teacher outside of teaching in studios where you get to set the rate and where they will contract with you directly in order to teach. And now you're talking $100, $150, $200 per class. Now you can start to see how the math can work out. But additionally, the other thing is, the problem with yoga teaching is that it's not a scalable model. There's only one of you, and the only way you can make money is if you are teaching a class. And if you have a particular day with 5 different things, you're driving all over the place. So you only make the money when you physically are teaching. But of course, we know that there's lots of other ways for you to bring in revenue. You could create a product and sell it. Like, for instance, I just mentioned my book. I spent several months writing that book, but I've been selling that book since it came out many years ago. For instance, my two main programs for yoga teachers, the Yoga Anatomy Accelerator and the Yoga Anatomy Blueprint Learning Program. Both of those programs took me some time to build, but I can market them and enroll yoga teachers in these programs over and over and over and over and over again. So building a product of some kind is one way to earn revenue without tying it to you physically doing the work. There are lots of different things you can do that leverage the scalability that's inherent, that's built into doing things virtually. So let's say you even just in a very simple way, let's say you teach yoga online and you charge $15 per person per class, but you're teaching it online so anybody can come. Now all you need to do is market that, and the scalability is endless. You could have 1 million people on that Zoom. I don't know if Zoom could hold 1 million people, but let's even say you had 200 people at $15 a person. That's $3,000 for one yoga class. And that is possible when you teach online. I mean, that's pretty amazing. So I want you to see how one of the myths of teaching yoga full time is that people often think of it as running around teaching a bunch of classes. And that can't be a sustainable model unless you have another source of income. And maybe you do, and maybe then that becomes your model. But I wanted to just lay that out for you. The other thing that I think is a myth, and I believed in this myth myself when I was working full time in that corporate job and wanted to switch to teaching yoga, is I had this vision of the full-time yoga teacher's lifestyle looks like sitting in a coffee shop multiple times a day, sipping on chai tea and typing away on my laptop, and then leaving to go teach a class, and then going to Sweet Green for lunch, and then going back to Starbucks and typing away on my computer, and then going to teach another class. Like I had this very idyllic view of what a full-time yoga teacher would look like. Matter of fact, shortly into my, when I eventually, and it wasn't even really eventually, I took about a year from when I graduated from teacher training to create and implement a plan to leave my full-time corporate career I was just telling you about. And and oh goodness, I lost my train of thought. Oh, I know. And so shortly thereafter, I was contacted by the Boston Globe and they wanted to interview me because I'm not sure how the journalist found out. Maybe she read it on my LinkedIn, but she wanted to interview me about how I shifted from working full time to teaching yoga full time. And she was going to have a photographer photograph me for the article. And then she was going to interview me and ask me how I created sort of my plan to leave my full-time job to teach for Baptiste Yoga. And I remember the day of the interview and the photo shoot, I was consumed with what was I going to wear? What Lululemon outfit was I going to wear? What bag was I going to be carrying? She was talking to me about taking a picture of me going into the studio with, I don't know. I don't even remember if she literally broke it down this way, but the image we ended up using for the article was me walking into the Baptiste studio. If you live in Boston, it was on Columbus Ave in the South End, and I think I had like a Starbucks cup in one hand, and I had a long sleeve like pink top on, and I had a bag with a yoga mat slid through it. I mean, the whole thing was so contrived. When I look back, and I don't know if I have a copy of the article or maybe I can Google for it, I just think about how consumed I was with how I looked because I was very much ensconced with this idea, this vision of what I imagined a full-time yoga teacher looked like. I mean, it was to the point where if someone ran into me on the street in Boston and I wasn't drinking like chai tea or something that was quote unquote yogic, I was worried they were going to judge me like I wasn't a valid yoga teacher. I mean, it was really crazy. And this was in the early 2000s when there were not a lot of yoga studios in Boston, where Baptiste Yoga was huge, where it was one of only a handful of yoga studios that were out there, where people were, I kid you not, lining up for class, where you had to get there an hour before to get a spot, where there were people out the door. I mean, it was so popular. It was a crazy, crazy time. And so for me to get one of the, highly coveted spots on the roster of teachers, I really felt like, wow, like I've made it. And this is like such an important position. And it was something I coveted so much. And yet I look back on it and I think, God, my head really wasn't thinking of the things that really mattered. And it's not anything that I'm ashamed of. I mean, I think I was caught up in the moment, but the idea that that was the lifestyle of a yoga teacher, I just want to dispel that myth for you. One of the things I always say to entrepreneurs, and I haven't done it so much recently, but there was a time in my life I was a coach for an entrepreneurial organization in Boston. And I used to do a lot of entrepreneurial coaching for young women who wanted to build their own business. And, I would say to them, it's not, one of the things you really need to consider is, are you the kind of person who can work independently? Because that's what an entrepreneur is. And if you're a little confused about why I'm saying entrepreneur and not yoga teacher, when you are a yoga teacher working full time, you are an entrepreneur. You are an independent contractor. You are working for yourself. You're going out and creating opportunities to work. You're not working for a company. You are an independent contractor. So you're an entrepreneur. If you don't teach, you don't make money. If you don't pursue new gigs, you don't get new money. You have to be the one to go out and pursue things. You have to be the one to make stuff happen. And so that's one of the qualities that I would talk to these young entrepreneurs about. And I would say, do you think you're the kind of person that can work on your own? Or do you really need and like the support of having a boss, being part of a team, having someone give you assignments? Like, it's okay to say that is how I'm built. So that's one of the myths. It's not the lifestyle of like Starbucks and shopping at Lululemon and having lunch at Sweet Green all the while tapping away on your laptop. That is just a pie in the sky idea. It's really a lot of grind. It's a lot of grind and it's a lot of, I'm not exactly sure, yes, it's important to have a base of class income coming in, but then everything else that you're doing, you're not really sure what kind of income you're going to get from those other things. I mean, I can certainly tell you from month to month, I do a good amount of marketing for both of my main offers, the Yoga Anatomy Accelerator program and the Yoga Anatomy Blueprint Learning program. And there's variability from month to month. Some months I'll have a number of yoga teachers enroll, other months I won't have as many. And the variability is not necessarily tied to work that I'm doing. I can have months where I do the same amount of outreach, where I use similar techniques, and I have a lot of people enroll, and then I have other months where I don't have as many people enroll. So part of what you need to deal with, not so much in regards to the classes, because that's stable income. The other things, the marketing of internet type programs, is the variability and being able to deal with that variance from month to month. And from a financial standpoint, that can be challenging, and you need to be able to plan for that. So I think those kinds of things cover some of the myths. And then, there's more I can go into. I go into more in the book, but for time purposes, I'm going to try to kind of keep this conversation a little shorter. But the other one thing I wanted to definitely mention to you, especially if you're aspiring to leave your full-time job and teach full-time, is health insurance. Right now, I know that's a hot topic. Actually, it's been a hot topic forever, but certainly in the United States, in particular, with our current political climate, in terms of the different initiatives that are being held out by the different political parties, there is a lot of conversation about health insurance. But just basics, 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 and this is not to speak politics, but just I wanted to frame it in that way. Um, but just basics of health insurance and finances. The point that I wanted to make was if you're working full time, chances are you have health insurance that's attached to your job. So remember that if you leave that job to teach yoga full time, your only short-term option is to pay for Cobra. And Cobra is, I forget what it stands for, but it is the extension of your health insurance after you leave a job that runs for 18 months, that continues your coverage, but you have to pay a lot more than if you were a full-time employee. But it's still less than if you were to buy insurance out there as an independent person, not attached to a company. So I wanted to just bring that up because if you have aspirations to leave your job, I don't want to say you must have a plan for health insurance because I don't know your situation, but I have a very extensive healthcare background, both working in the clinical setting and working for health insurance companies and health insurance consulting firms. And at any point in your life to go without health insurance, I think is asking for potential financial disaster if something were to go wrong and you didn't have any insurance. Additionally, if you want to give yourself the best chance to live a long, healthy life, you have to take care of yourself, and preventative care is the best way to do that. And that requires regular annual appointments. So that's medical care. And sure, I mean, there are people out there now that don't have health insurance and they do that with their eyes open and they claim that it's less money, but you always run the risk, God forbid cancer, God forbid car accident, et cetera, et cetera. So just keep in mind that there is that health insurance piece that you need to consider. How are you going to cover for that if you were to leave your job? So now that we've talked a little bit about that, let's talk about what are some of the things that are possible if you are working a full-time job and teaching on the side. And I want to read to you this one part of Big Magic that I think will set this part of the conversation off on the right foot. Elizabeth Gilbert, and if you have the book, I'm reading from page 152. She's writing about her day job, and she says, "It wasn't until my fourth book, and that book was Eat, Pray, Love, that I finally allowed myself to quit all other work and became nothing other than a writer of books. I had held on to those other sources of income for so long because I never wanted to burden my writing with the responsibility of paying for my life. I knew better than to ask this of my writing because over the years I have watched so many other people murder their creativity by demanding that their art pay the bills. I've seen artists drive themselves broke and crazy because of this insistence that they are not legitimate creators unless they can exclusively live off their creativity. And when their creativity fails them, meaning it doesn't pay the rent, they descend into resentment, anxiety, or even bankruptcy. Worst of all, they often quit creating at all." And then she goes on to say, "There is no dishonor in having a job. What is dishonorable is scaring away your creativity by demanding that it pay for your entire existence. This is why whenever anyone tells me they're quitting their day job in order to write a novel, my palms get a little sweaty. This is why, when anyone tells me that their plan for getting out of debt is to sell their first screenplay, I'm like, yikes." So I wanted to read that to you because I think for the kind of person who is working full time and aspires to teach full time and feels badly that they have to work a full time job, I wanted to read that to you because you know, this idea that the grass is always greener on the other side, that you're going to quit your day job and just magically find this amazingly, wonderful lifestyle teaching yoga full time, and you're going to have, enough money coming in to pay your bills and then some, and it's just going to be massive fulfillment all the way around. It's typically not like that. And sure, I mean, there are these brief shining moments where you hear about people. Like I can remember many years ago I heard of a yoga teacher in New York City who in a very random way got Deepak Chopra as a private yoga client. And I remember, I think it was even in an article, that she was charging something like $300 a session to teach him privates. I want to say this is the case. And I was just thinking, wow, like, can you imagine, at the time I was thinking, can you imagine $300 for a private and teaching a famous person? And that, of course, led to a whole bunch of other celebrity clients. And that was it. She was off to the races and making money teaching these celebrity clients private sessions. And she was charging, a good amount of money for the sessions. And wow. But those kinds of things don't happen often, and we can't bank on those kinds of things happening, no pun intended. So the idea is there's nothing wrong with having a full-time job and teaching on the side. And, one of the really valuable things about it, I would say the most valuable thing about it, is that when you're working full time, you don't have to worry about making money from teaching yoga as much as if you were teaching yoga full time. So, like she says in the book, you don't have to burden your yoga teaching with the responsibility of paying for your life. And that is an amazing load off your shoulders. So, if you're working full time and you want to teach full time and you're feeling badly that you can't, let's reframe that and be grateful that you have a job, and that job and that income and the health insurance associated with that job is going to give you an advantage when it comes to teaching, because you're not going to have to burden your teaching with all this responsibility for creating enough money to cover your expenses. Now, having said that, there are a couple of practical things to consider, because if you are working full time, you're not going to have a lot of time for teaching other than whatever time is left. So you could teach before work, you could teach after work, you can teach on the weekends. And so, number one, that's something to consider. And number two, and this is the most important thing, if you're spending hours and hours planning for every class, that we would want to shift, because you don't have a lot of available free time. When you're working full time, you immediately cut into your free time because you're at work. And so we need to maximize our free time so that we're really feeling fulfilled as a person. And the last thing that I would want you to do is to be spending a lot of your free time every week planning for your classes. So you're definitely going to want to create a signature sequence. And if you don't know how to do that, send me a DM on Instagram and I will send you the how-to video on that. You're definitely going to want a really solid cueing strategy. And if you don't have one of those, ask me for my cues video. I'll send you that. And lastly, the whole component of the mindset that you have around teaching yoga, that has to be top notch. It has to be the kind of thing where when you go in to teach your class, you have very little to no angst about it, because you just don't have the mental space available to be working full time and teaching on the side if those on the side classes are taking up a lot of your mental space and creating a lot of stress. It needs to be the kind of thing, and I can certainly relate to this because there was a time in my life that I was working on the side and I was teaching on the side and working full time. And that's another story, because I got myself into $30,000 of debt and I had to go back to work to get myself out of debt. I cover that in the book. But the point is, when you're working full time and you're teaching on the side, you don't want to have, you want to be able to just go in and teach that class with no mental heaviness around it. It's just, I'm doing this for fun. I'm doing this for impact. I'm doing this because maybe eventually I want to do this full time. And right now I'm working full time. So when I go in to teach, I want to be able to just go in there and teach the class and leave. I don't want it to be that there's a whole big planning session I have to do before. I'm super nervous about it. I berate myself when I leave. And so this speaks to the whole mindset piece. And the mindset piece is really what I tackle through the coaching that I do with yoga teachers. There's a little bit of coaching I do in the 4-week program, the Yoga Anatomy Accelerator, but the bulk of the coaching that you would get on this is through my one-on-one program, the Yoga Anatomy Blueprint Learning Program. And so my point is, if you are working full time and teaching on the side and you're really struggling to have your classes feel like, hey, this is easy and fun, I can do this, no big deal at all, I want you to get in touch with me, because you are high on my list for someone that I need to help, because you just don't have the time. You just don't have the time. Your teaching needs to be, I dare say it, efficient. I don't mean efficient as in cold, like coming across to your students as cold and efficient. What I mean is you've got to be the kind of person that you've got your plan, you can go into your class and teach. You're not worried about, are people going to like this? You're not spending a lot of time at night worrying about the class you have tomorrow. Like the mindset needs to be top notch. Now, honestly, I want that for every person. For every person teaching, that is what I want for them. And that's why I do what I do. And if you work with me in one of my programs, I will help you shift into that mode of teaching. But especially if you're working full time, this is a model for you that, dare I say, really needs to be in place. Otherwise, you just won't do it. You just won't do it. And I have talked to plenty of yoga teachers who are working full time and they just got to the point where they said, you know what? I didn't keep my on the side teaching because it was just too much stress. And it's like, oh man, because think about it. You can have the best of both worlds. You can be working full time and teaching on the side, having money come in from both situations, having enjoyment come in from both situations, or maybe it's the kind of thing where you really don't like your full time job. And so teaching becomes an outlet for you. Teaching becomes a way for you to fuel your passion. Teaching becomes a way for you to make an impact in a way that you'll not be able to make in your full time job. And so there's so many advantages to that model. And the last thing I want to say is this. If you are working full time and teaching on the side, do not feel and do not say anything that downplays what you're doing. It's not, oh, I'm working full time and oh, I'm just teaching a class or two. Or, and I hear this from teachers, or oh, it's not really that important. I just have something on the side. You are teaching. If you are teaching one class a week, that is teaching yoga. You are a teacher. So don't downplay it. Don't make it seem like, oh, that's a nothing. And furthermore, if you want to take on more, you can take on more, but only if you start to implement some of the things that I would share with you if we were to work together, unless you already have it down on your own. So that's why I wanted to have this conversation with you so that we could really set you up for success so you can keep all those balls in the air and not feel stressed and instead feel like, oh man, I'm actually doing what I want to do in lots of different ways. So with that, that brings us to the end of today's episode. So I wanted to just end with a couple of offers for you. The first one is if you are someone who's working full time and teaching on the side and you want some help really refining your schedule and how that's all working for you, send me a DM on Instagram and tell me you listened to this episode and ask for a plan of action call. And I'll help you create a plan of action around how you can keep teaching full time, working full time and teaching on the side and have everything happen smoothly. Well, based on a lot of the stuff we covered today. So we'll take a look at your teaching schedule, we'll take a look at your work schedule, we'll take a look at the planning you're doing, and we'll come up with a plan of action for you that allows you to keep all these things moving. Secondly, if you're listening to this and you're someone who wants to quit your day job to create a plan of action to teach full time, you're also somebody I can do a plan of action call with, POA. So send me a DM on Instagram, tell me you heard this episode, tell me a little bit about your situation and you want to set up a plan of action call and we'll set that up and I'll create a plan with you. Both of these calls are free. This is like me offering you a free coaching call. I don't know why people would not be clamoring to do this. So I really hope I get a lot of requests for these calls. So that's one thing. The next thing is October 1st, 2025, I'm opening my virtual yoga studio. I've been toying around with doing this for a couple of months now, and I'm going for it. So you will see on my website, and I'll include the link in the show notes, the link to the virtual studio. I'm starting out with 2 classes a week. Classes are all levels, classes are an hour, classes are $15 a head. But additionally, it's more than just a yoga class because after every class, I'm going to open up the mics and you can ask questions about poses, anatomy, alignment, sequencing. If you're a yoga teacher, which my guess is you are, you can ask questions about teaching. So every yoga class is more than a yoga class because you'll get this Q&A session at the end. And what I've found in teaching yoga online is that people are much more inclined to hang around and ask questions versus when they're in person. Because when they're in person, they typically, after class, just pack up their stuff and leave. So these classes are more than just yoga. It's really an opportunity for you to get your questions answered along whatever lines you want to ask them, whether it's yoga related, yoga teaching related, anatomy related. So the link to sign up for class will be in the show notes. It's also off my website, also off my Instagram link in bio. The virtual yoga studio is open as of October 1st, 2025, and I hope to see you in a class. I'll be adding more classes once the classes I have on the schedule now start to pick up in terms of attendance. So if you don't see a time that works for you, know that it most likely will be coming in the future. I'm starting off with 2 times a week, Wednesday at noon and Thursday at 6. All times are Eastern because I live in Boston. And I specifically picked those 2 times because the noon class will allow me to capture people outside the US. And the 6 p.m. class Eastern will allow me to catch a lot of people in the US. And the next thing is in October, I'm launching my brand new ebook, which is really a unique format. It's really based on, for the better part of this year, I've been interviewed on many podcasts about yoga teaching. And I've pulled together the highlights of all these interviews along with links to each episode. And I've pulled it together in an ebook so that you can get all of the key lessons and key moments in these interviews without having to listen to all the episodes. And as you go through the ebook and you read the different highlights from the different conversations I've had on these different podcasts, if you do find one that intrigues you, the link to listen to the whole interview is right there. So next week, it'll be the first week in October. I'll be launching the new ebook. There'll be lots of different, ways you can get it, and especially in the initial week-long launch, there'll be some fun promotional things I'll be doing. So stay connected with me on Instagram so you can get the latest on that. Stay on my mailing list. You can get the latest on it that way as well. And then the last thing I'll say is, I know throughout this episode, I've talked about the 2 different offers I have to help you. And one is the Yoga Anatomy Accelerator, which is my 4-week group program. And the other is my one-on-one program, the Yoga Anatomy Blueprint Learning Program. So if you're looking for either group or one-on-one, but overall, you're looking for a way to build your confidence and your skill as a yoga teacher, you as a podcast listener get a discount for being a listener of this show. So if you're interested in finding out more about how either program works, send me a DM on Instagram and use the words podcast offer. And I'll tell you about whatever program you're interested in, the group or the one-on-one. If you want to read up about these programs, both links will be in the show notes. Both links are on my website. Both links are in my Instagram link in bio. So you can do a little preview of what you get in both of these programs by reading up on them. But you'll get a discount because you're a podcast listener. So send me a DM on Instagram with those words, podcast offer, and I'll tell you about the discount and tell you how you can enroll and take advantage of that discount to get started. But the overall goal is to get you feeling like I am teaching, I am loving it, it is easy, it is fun, I know what I'm talking about, I understand anatomy, I understand how to apply it to my cues and sequences, I understand the why behind the cue, teaching is easy and fun, and I'm making an impact. So if that is what you're looking for, I can definitely help you get there. With that, we're going to wrap up this episode. I so appreciate you listening until the end, and I can't wait to talk to you again. Happy birthday to me when you're listening to this. And I really appreciate your listenership. And I'll talk to you again on the next episode. Namaste. Thanks for being here with me today. I hope you enjoyed the episode. And hey, one more thing. While I don't know you personally, I know what a yoga teacher looks like who's ready to have a breakthrough, a breakthrough to being the kind of yoga teacher who walks around the room, sharing cues you know the reason for, understands anatomy, teaching signature sequences without notes or any need to practice with class, and loves teaching yoga without stress, anxiety, or nervousness. If you are ready to be that yoga teacher, here is your next step. DM me the words podcast offer, and I will give you a special incentive to work with me inside of my signature program just because you are listening to the podcast. DM me on Instagram at Bare Bones Yoga. I can't wait to hear from you.